Welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about dopamine. The relationship between dopamine and nirvana is a fascinating intersection of neurochemistry and spiritual philosophy. While dopamine is widely recognized as a crucial neurotransmitter involved in the brain's reward system, its connection to the concept of nirvana is more abstract and layered. Nirvana, a term rooted in Buddhist philosophy, refers to a state of ultimate liberation, peace, and enlightenment. It signifies the cessation of suffering, the end of the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, samsara, and the attainment of pure consciousness. Understanding how dopamine, a chemical that influences mood, motivation, and pleasure, might be connected to nirvana requires exploring both the scientific basis of dopamine's function in the brain and the spiritual essence of nirvana. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, a chemical messenger in the brain that plays a vital role in numerous physiological processes, including movement, reward, and the regulation of mood. It is part of the brain's reward system and is closely tied to the sensation of pleasure. Dopamine is released in response to rewarding stimuli, whether those are physical, such as eating food, or psychological, such as achieving a goal or experiencing a rush of excitement. This release creates feelings of pleasure and motivates behavior that seeks to repeat the rewarding experience. For this reason, dopamine is often described as the feel-good neurotransmitter. However, dopamine's role is not just about pleasure, but also about motivation and anticipation. It helps drive goal-directed behavior by making us more focused on achieving specific outcomes. When we achieve a goal, the brain releases a burst of dopamine, reinforcing the behavior and creating a sense of satisfaction. On the other hand, the absence of dopamine or disruptions in its pathways are associated with various psychiatric conditions, such as depression and addiction, where motivation and the ability to experience pleasure are diminished. Nirvana, in contrast, is a term that originates from ancient Buddhist teachings. It refers to the cessation of suffering, dukkha, and the extinguishing of desires that perpetuate the cycle of samsara or rebirth. The Buddha taught that by following the Eightfold Path, one could gradually reduce attachment and desire, which are the root causes of suffering. Through practices such as meditation, mindfulness, ethical living, and wisdom, one could ultimately reach a state of nirvana, characterized by peace, liberation, and freedom from the cycle of birth and death. Nirvana is often described as a state beyond ordinary experience, where attachment, ego, and worldly desires no longer control the individual. The Buddhist tradition does not frame nirvana in terms of a pleasurable or blissful experience, but rather as a state of profound peace, equanimity, and liberation from the emotional and mental turbulence that typically governs human existence. This peace is achieved not through the pursuit of pleasure, but through the relinquishment of desire, the cessation of craving, and the dissolution of the self. At first glance, dopamine and nirvana may seem unrelated as they stem from different domains, neuroscience and spirituality. However, when examined more closely, there are intriguing parallels that suggest a connection between the two. A central aspect of the Buddhist path to nirvana is the cessation of desire and attachment. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from craving and clinging to things, whether material possessions, relationships, or even ideas. Dopamine is inherently tied to desire, as it is the chemical response to anticipated rewards. The more a person desires something, the more dopamine is released in anticipation of receiving it. However, this pursuit of pleasure through dopamine-driven, reward-seeking behavior can lead to a cycle of craving and dissatisfaction, as the pleasure derived from these rewards is temporary, leaving individuals constantly seeking more. Nirvana, on the other hand, is the cessation of this craving and attachment. It is a state in which desires no longer dictate one's experience, leading to an end to the cycle of suffering. From a neurochemical perspective, one could argue that achieving a state of nirvana would involve a shift in the brain's reward circuitry. In this state, the brain may no longer be driven by the release of dopamine in response to external rewards, and a person may experience a deeper, more sustainable sense of peace and fulfillment that transcends the temporary highs provided by dopamine-driven pleasure. While dopamine is often linked to pleasurable experiences, nirvana is not a state of hedonistic pleasure or euphoric joy. Rather, it is a profound peace that arises when one transcends the fluctuations of pleasure and pain, success and failure. In many ways, the liberation associated with nirvana could be seen as a shift from the constant cycle of dopamine-driven reward-seeking behavior. Instead of being motivated by the pursuit of external rewards, the individual becomes self-sufficient in their inner peace and contentment. This idea can be understood in terms of how the brain processes pleasure. Dopamine is integral to the brain's reward pathways, but true peace might involve stepping outside of these pathways. In this sense, nirvana could be seen as a state where dopamine's influence wanes and the mind reaches a place of stillness and contentment that is not dependent on external stimuli. This inner stillness may be comparable to the experience of mindfulness or meditative states where the constant pursuit of sensory gratification is quieted and a person can experience a deeper sense of being. Some neuroscientific research suggests that long-term meditation practices, which are central to many paths toward nirvana, can lead to changes in brain activity and structure. These practices often enhance regions of the brain associated with emotional regulation, self-awareness, and compassion, while dampening areas related to self-centered thinking and stress. There is also evidence that mindfulness and meditation practices can alter dopamine levels in the brain, suggesting that they may influence the very mechanisms that contribute to pleasure, desire, and attachment. These alterations might provide a neurochemical basis for the experience of spiritual peace. By rewiring the brain's reward systems through sustained meditation, a practitioner may experience a reduction in the cravings and desires that trigger dopamine release, leading to a state of contentment that aligns with the concept of nirvana. In conclusion, while dopamine and nirvana come from different realms of understanding, neuroscience, and spirituality, There is a fascinating connection between the two when we examine their roles in human experience. Dopamine drives motivation, pleasure, and reward-seeking behavior, often leading to a cycle of craving and dissatisfaction. Nirvana, conversely, represents the cessation of craving and attachment, a state of inner peace and liberation. By understanding how dopamine influences our desires and how practices like meditation can alter brain function, we begin to see how the path to nirvana might also involve changes in the brain's reward system. The link between dopamine and nirvana is not about eliminating dopamine altogether, but about transcending the need for dopamine-driven pleasure. In achieving this transcendence, one might experience a deeper, more lasting sense of fulfillment, one that is not dependent on external rewards, but grounded in a profound inner peace.